I got a phone call from a friend of mine who was a very senior Metropolitan Police officer, and I was told, don't do it. You know, if the newspaper report was true and you are going to be asked to investigate this, don't do it.
Does an alternative narrative exist for the events inside apartment 5A? One that extends beyond the possibility of an unknown intruder? To be precise, how much can be established with certainty regarding the actions of Jerry and Kate McCann on the night Madeleine vanished? Several details, often overlooked in media narratives and official accounts, present challenging questions. A cadaver dog, trained specifically to detect the scent of human decomposition, gave a strong alert to Madeleine's treasured toy, Cuddle Cat. Paradoxically, the same dog registered no alert on the bed where she was said to have been sleeping. Forensic experts point out that the development of cadaver scent typically requires a post-mortem interval of at least 60 minutes for bodily fluids to permeate an object. Jerry McCann stated he last saw Madeleine alive at 9:05 p.m., while Kate McCann reported her missing at 10:00 p.m. This leaves a time frame of less than 1 hour. A critical question, therefore, is how the toy could absorb a cadaver scent while the bed remained unaffected. Compounding this forensic puzzle is Kate McCann's decision to wash the toy immediately after learning that police intended to collect it for DNA analysis. Observers have since debated whether this was a distraught mother's instinctual act of grief or a decision that, intentionally or not, could have removed potential evidence. Furthermore, their emotional conduct has been a point of analysis. In contrast to the unrestrained grief often witnessed in other high-profile cases of missing children, the McCann's demeanor was consistently described as composed and controlled. During interviews, their focus appeared at times to shift from the search for their daughter to their own personal suffering, framing themselves as victims of media pressure and suspicion. Was this a personal coping mechanism, or a subtle redirection of the narrative? More unsettling still is the speculation that Madeleine may not have been placed in her bed that night at all. If such a theory were to hold any credence, it would fundamentally challenge the timeline provided by the McCanns. Could her death have occurred earlier in the evening, prior to the commencement of the now infamous dinner checks? Beyond emotional responses and timelines, another question persists. How did this tragedy transform into a massive fundraising operation, attracting millions in donations to sustain media campaigns and fund legal battles, while fundamental forensic inconsistencies remain unaddressed? Finally, one must consider whether the numerous investigative blunders were simply a series of unfortunate coincidences, or did the immediate contamination of the crime scene, facilitated by friends and resort staff moving freely inside the apartment, serve as a convenience, permanently erasing potential evidence? These are not accusations, but rather the persistent, unresolved, and undeniable questions that shadow the case. They represent a silent undercurrent that no timeline, suspect list, or media campaign has ever fully addressed. Until they are answered, the story of Madeleine McCann remains incomplete. Let us now examine the established facts of the case, the suspects, and the void that continues to define it. It has been 18 years since Madeleine McCann disappeared from her family's holiday apartment in Portugal. Despite global media coverage, multiple international investigations, and over £13 million in public funding, the world remains without an answer as to what happened to her. In June 2025, a new search renewed public interest. German authorities, believing they possessed concrete evidence against a long-term suspect, Christian Bruckner, requested that Portuguese police excavate an overgrown rural site near Praia da Luz. The search lasted 3 days. It yielded bone fragments, torn fabric, and a sealed plastic bag buried beneath a stone slab, yet resulted in no confirmation, no match, and no charges, only continued waiting. Bruckner, a convicted sex offender with a known history of child abuse and violence, had resided in the area around the time of Madeleine's disappearance. Investigators had previously discovered thousands of images of child abuse concealed beneath the body of his deceased dog. He also made a suspicious telephone call near the resort on the exact night Madeleine vanished. Despite years of investigation, both literal and legal, Bruckner has never been charged in connection to Madeleine's case. He remains imprisoned for other crimes, but unless prosecutors act soon, he may be released by 2026. For many, the sense of urgency is palpable. German investigators maintain they hold crucial information, yet not enough admissible proof. Scotland Yard's Operation Grange continues its work with reduced resources. The Portuguese police, having reopened the case in 2013, have offered little public comment since. The case exists in a strange limbo, technically active, but practically frozen. Throughout it all, one location remains at the center of every theory, every timeline, and every lingering doubt. Apartment 5A. It was small, unguarded, and unlocked. A child lay sleeping just meters from a public walkway. There were no security cameras, no alarm, no signs of forced entry, no screams, just an empty bed, an open window, and a family whose lives were irrevocably fractured in a single hour. Was it a kidnapping, carefully planned and cleanly executed? A burglary that went catastrophically wrong? A tragic accident concealed in a moment of panic? Or is the truth something else entirely? Something no one has yet dared to admit? What really happened inside apartment 5A? To approach that question, we must step back from the evidence and examine the people involved. Who were the McCanns before the cameras and the suspicion? What was their routine during that holiday? Who might have been observing them? And what small choices did they make that would later be subjected to global scrutiny? Before the disappearance became an international scandal, it was simply a family holiday, comprised of parents, children, and friends. And within that normality, the seeds of tragedy were somehow planted. Let us return to the beginning. Before the headlines, the televised press conferences, the search dogs, the media frenzy, and the whispered doubts, there was just a family. The McCanns, by all accounts, were an ordinary, respectable British family from Rothley, a quiet, middle-class town in Leicestershire, England. Gerry McCann, a softly spoken cardiologist, worked at Glenfield Hospital. His wife, Kate McCann, was a trained general practitioner. They were both medical professionals, educated, focused, and seemingly grounded. There was nothing about them that appeared unusual, which is what made the subsequent events all the more incomprehensible. For years, they had endeavored to have children. Their path to parenthood was marked by difficulty and uncertainty, with fertility issues leading them to pursue IVF, a physically and emotionally demanding process. But in 2003, their efforts were rewarded with the birth of a healthy baby girl. They named her Madeleine Beth McCann. She had bright blue eyes, soft blonde hair, and a distinctive small brown fleck, a coloboma, in her right eye that made her instantly recognizable. To Kate and Gerry, she was not just a child. She was a miracle, the daughter they had feared they might never have. Madeleine was described as a curious, bright, and affectionate child who left an impression on those she met. She was protective of her younger siblings and possessed a natural warmth. Kate often described her as thoughtful beyond her years. In 2005, the McCann family expanded again with the arrival of twins, Sean and Amelie. At just 18 months old in May 2007, they were still toddlers. Madeleine, their older sister, had recently turned 3. the family dynamic was one of energy and innocence. In late April 2007, the McCanns traveled to Portugal for a much-needed holiday. Their destination was Praia da Luz, a picturesque coastal town in the Algarve region, marketed as a family-friendly haven for tourists with its sun-washed streets and quiet beaches. The McCanns stayed at the Ocean Club, a modest complex of rental apartments. They were not alone. 7 of their close friends, along with their own children, joined them, forming a group of 9 adults and 8 children. This group would later be referred to by the press as the Tapas 7 or Tapas 9. Each family occupied their own apartment within the same block. The McCanns were in apartment 5A, a ground-floor corner unit, opening onto a small pedestrian street on one side and a garden path on the other. The unit comprised 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a small kitchen. Its location was practical for the routine the adults quickly established. Every night, after putting their children to bed, the adults would congregate at the resort's tapas restaurant, situated approximately 55 meters away, a walk of just under a minute from the McCann's apartment. From the restaurant terrace, however, the apartment units were not visible. That distance would become one of the most intensely debated measurements in the case. Nevertheless, the group believed the risk was minimal. They devised a rotation whereby each parent would take turns leaving the dinner table every 20 to 30 minutes to check on their sleeping children. This system had been in place for several nights without incident. The McCanns typically used the rear patio door to enter and exit the apartment. This door, facing a garden walkway, was intentionally left unlocked to allow for easier access during the dinner checks. The front door, opening onto the narrow Rua Dr. Agostinho da Silva, remained locked. The arrangement seemed manageable. The system functioned until the night it failed. Thursday, the 3rd of May 2007, began like any other day of their trip. The families swam, played tennis, and had breakfast together. Madeleine had attended the kids' club that morning, excited to see her friends. There was no indication of anything amiss. That evening, the children were put to bed as usual between 7:30 and 8 o'clock p.m. Madeleine was dressed in pale pink and white Eeyore pajamas. The twins were placed in cots beside her. The nightlight was off, a detail investigators would later question, and the patio door was left ajar. At 8:30 p.m., the adults met for dinner at the tapas restaurant. At approximately 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann rose to perform his check. He walked back to the apartment, entered through the patio door, and found all 3 children asleep. He remained only briefly before returning to the restaurant. On his way, he stopped to converse with a fellow resort guest, Jez Wilkins, just outside apartment 5A. Roughly 10 minutes later, Jane Tanner, one of the friends from the dinner party, left to check on her own daughter. As she passed apartment 5A, she noticed a man walking away from the complex, carrying a small child. The child wore light-colored pajamas and had no shoes. Jane Tanner thought little of it at the time, assuming it was a father carrying his sleeping daughter. At around 9:30 p.m., another friend, Matthew Oldfield, offered to check on the McCann's children during his own round. He entered the apartment, saw light from the children's door, and heard the twins breathing. But crucially, he did not look directly at Madeleine's bed. Then, at 10 o'clock p.m., it was Kate McCann's turn to check. She entered through the patio door and walked into the children's room. The window was wide open, the curtain was fluttering, and Madeleine's bed was empty. The moments that followed were chaotic. Kate McCann ran back to the restaurant screaming, "They've taken her! Someone's taken Madeleine!" Friends and staff commenced a search of the area. Later, investigators would learn of something Madeleine had said to her mother just the day before. The simple sentence would acquire a chilling weight in hindsight. She had asked, "Why didn't you come when Sean and I cried last night?" Whether it was a child's innocent question or a signal missed too late, no one then knew. In the end, the McCanns were a family attempting to enjoy a holiday, trusting in the safety of a routine and the belief that nothing terrible could happen just 55 meters away. But in apartment 5A, sometime between 9:05 p.m. and 10:00 p.m., the unthinkable did happen, and what followed would become one of the most haunting mysteries of the 21st century. The first 48 hours in any missing child case are considered crucial. The golden window when memories are sharpest, evidence is at its freshest, and leads can be pursued before they grow cold. However, in the case of Madeleine McCann, these critical hours were not merely lost. They were, by many accounts, squandered, with consequences that have impacted the investigation ever since. When Kate McCann discovered her daughter was missing at 10:00 p.m. on the 3rd of May 2007, panic erupted. She ran back to the tapas restaurant, shouting, "They've taken her!" An immediate search was launched by friends, resort staff, and other tourists. But what transpired was not a coordinated emergency response. It was chaos. Instead of securing apartment 5A as a potential crime scene, dozens of well-intentioned people moved freely in and out. They opened doors, touched windows, walked across floors, comforted the twins, rearranged items, and even sat on the furniture. While their actions were born of a desire to help, they were unknowingly destroying what little forensic evidence may have existed. The bedroom where Madeleine had slept became contaminated within minutes. The front door, the window, the curtains, every surface that could have held a clue was now compromised. It took the local police, the Policia Judiciaria, between 30 and 40 minutes to arrive after being called. Upon their arrival, there was no clear procedure. No perimeter was sealed, no forensic team was immediately dispatched, and no official list was made of everyone who had entered the apartment. Even basic investigative protocols, such as preserving footprints, dusting for prints, or logging items, were either ignored or delayed. The crime scene was not treated as such. It was handled more like a domestic incident. In the days that followed, further opportunities were lost. Local officers lacked experience in managing high-profile abduction cases, and language barriers with British witnesses exacerbated the difficulties. Witness statements were taken without professional translators, leading to potential errors and inconsistencies. A comprehensive door-to-door canvass of nearby buildings was not properly conducted that night. No roadblocks were established, no airport alerts were issued, and no early alert system, similar to an Amber Alert, was activated because Portugal did not have one. When British sniffer dogs were finally brought in weeks later, they introduced a new and chilling layer of confusion. One dog, trained to detect the scent of a human corpse, alerted behind the living room sofa in the McCann's apartment, and again in the boot of the rental car the family had hired weeks after Madeleine disappeared. Another dog, trained to detect traces of blood, responded in the same spots. These reactions raised serious questions and fueled dark suspicions. Forensic samples were taken and sent for DNA analysis. But by then, the samples had degraded. What remained was a mixed DNA profile, possibly from multiple people, but nothing definitive that could be presented in court. The media seized upon this development, spinning a narrative that pointed back at the parents. The dog alerts were treated as near proof, but the science dictates otherwise. Cadaver dogs are powerful investigative tools, but their alerts do not constitute standalone evidence. Without conclusive DNA, the entire theory remained speculative. Then came the sighting. At approximately 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner, one of the McCann's dinner companions, claimed she saw a man walking away from apartment 5A, carrying a child in pink pajamas. The child's description matched Madeleine's. The man, she reported, was of medium build, wearing light-colored trousers and a dark jacket, and walked casually across the road before disappearing. Tanner did not recognize him and assumed at that moment it was a father carrying his child. This simple observation became one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the case. At the same time, Jane Tanner passed the apartment. Jerry McCann was standing just outside, talking with another resort guest, Jez Wilkins. Neither man saw Jane, nor did they see the man she described. How could three adults stand within feet of each other, yet one sees a stranger with a child, while the other two see nothing? Over time, Jane Tanner's account evolved. Details regarding the direction the man walked, the position of the child, and even the clothing shifted slightly with each telling. Years later, during a televised Crime Watch UK reconstruction, investigators concluded that the man Jane saw may have been an innocent British tourist collecting his own daughter from a nearby creche. By then, however, the image of the Tanner sighting had become iconic, even as its credibility unraveled. While the world debated dogs and sightings, the investigation began to turn inward. Portuguese authorities, under immense pressure to produce results, started to suspect the parents. Kate and Jerry McCann were named arguidos, or official suspects, in September 2007, 4 months after their daughter vanished. The reasons were circumstantial. The dog alerts, the rental car, and their calm demeanor in media interviews. Critics suggested they were not grieving sufficiently, while others pointed to their decision to leave young children alone while they dined, labeling it as negligent. Public opinion was sharply divided. The focus on the parents soon consumed the investigation, but this tunnel vision came at a cost. By concentrating on Kate and Jerry, detectives deprioritized other leads. Reports of strange men seen near the resort in the days before Madeleine disappeared were filed away. Witnesses who claimed to have seen suspicious vehicles were not properly followed up on. Resort staff, temporary workers, and local contractors were not cross-referenced with international criminal databases. Most critically, no digital records were pulled from mobile phone towers in the first 72 hours. In today's investigative landscape, this would have yielded metadata, text logs, and GPS pings. In 2007, that window of opportunity closed almost as soon as it opened. Compounding this failure was the lack of surveillance infrastructure. The Ocean Club Resort had no security cameras at the apartment entrances, and no CCTV near the garden pathway or alley where a suspect might have escaped. The streets of Praia da Luz were quiet, unmonitored, and dark. The apartment where Madeleine slept was on the ground floor, with easy access from multiple angles. It was both perfectly ordinary and horrifyingly vulnerable. In hindsight, the damage was irreversible. The contaminated crime scene, the missed leads, the diverted attention, and the public trial of 2 grieving parents all pulled the investigation further from what mattered most: finding Madeleine. By the time international coordination improved years later, the trail had gone cold. What happened in apartment 5A that night may never be fully known, but the subsequent mishandling, missteps, and misjudgments are an integral part of the story. Sometimes, justice is not only denied by malicious acts, but also delayed by human error. In the case of Madeleine McCann, the silence of the night was matched only by the silence of lost opportunity. What if Madeleine McCann was not the intended target? Among the theories that have emerged, the idea of a botched burglary stands out, not because it is sensational, but because it is brutally simple. It suggests that the disappearance was not the result of a carefully orchestrated kidnapping or a deep-seated vendetta, but rather a random break-in that spiraled out of control, a crime of opportunity, not intention. To understand this possibility, we must revisit Praia da Luz in the mid-2000s. The quiet Portuguese resort town was popular with tourists, yet beneath the postcard-perfect image was a more troubling pattern. In the months and years leading up to Madeleine's disappearance, the area had seen a noticeable spike in petty theft and nighttime burglaries. At least a dozen reported break-ins occurred in and around the Ocean Club between 2006 and 2007, many taking place while guests were asleep. Often there were no signs of forced entry, just open windows, unlocked patio doors, and valuables gone by morning. The McCann's apartment, Unit 5A, was a ground-floor corner unit with a sliding patio door facing a garden walkway. On the night of 3rd of May 2007, that door was left unlocked, not through negligence, but as part of a routine. The group of friends dined at the nearby restaurant, taking turns to check on their children, and for ease of access, they left the back entrance open. Under the burglary theory, an individual, perhaps a local petty criminal, was moving through the resort late at night looking for an easy target. They spotted the darkened apartment, saw the unlatched patio door, and entered with the simple intention of stealing valuables. What they did not expect, however, was Madeleine. It is possible the child stirred or spoke. In that split second, the intruder faced a choice: leave and risk being identified, or silence the threat. The theory suggests Madeleine may have been taken not as a planned abduction, but as a reaction to the risk of exposure. Critics of this theory point out an obvious flaw: nothing was stolen. However, panic can be a powerful disruptor of logic. If the thief believed they had been seen, they may have fled immediately. Worse, if they felt the child had to be silenced, the situation could have escalated into something far more tragic. This is where the theory grows darker. The British cadaver dogs that alerted to the scent of a corpse behind the sofa and in the boot of the family's rental car could indicate that Madeleine died inside the apartment, perhaps from a blow or fall during a struggle. The perpetrator, realizing the enormity of what had occurred, may have then removed her body. Yet again, the forensic evidence fell short. DNA samples were too mixed and degraded to provide any definitive match. No blood spatter, no fingerprints, no hair fibers linked to an outsider were found. The opportunity for clean evidence was long gone. Still, supporting details lend the theory weight. Operation Grange, the British-led review, took this possibility seriously. Detectives found that several previous burglaries near the Ocean Club had disturbing similarities. In one instance, an intruder entered an apartment while a child was sleeping in the same room. The access point in Madeleine's case, the unlocked patio door, fit the profile. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, who led Operation Grange in its early years, stated in a 2013 BBC interview that they were examining the case as a criminal act that had gone wrong. The implication was that the child may not have been the focus, but once she woke, she became the problem. In 2014, based on this line of investigation, British police conducted excavations in wasteland near Praia da Luz, suspecting a panicked perpetrator may have hidden a body nearby. No remains were found, but the operation demonstrated that the burglary theory had become a legitimate investigative path. Yet questions still challenge its foundation. How did an intruder leave without waking the twins or alerting neighbors? Why take Madeleine at all? And how has no low-level criminal ever confessed? The burglary theory may lack the drama of other scenarios, but in its simplicity lies a disturbing plausibility. What happened inside apartment 5A may not have been planned or personal. It may have been a random, horrifying accident, but the result is the same. A child gone, a family shattered, and a silence that still offers no answers. Not every tragedy is born from evil. Some are the result of confusion, fear, and one terrible mistake. In the case of Madeleine McCann, a theory that has lingered quietly in the background offers a far less sinister but no less devastating possibility. What if she was not abducted at all? What if Madeleine simply woke up, wandered out of her apartment looking for her parents, and was struck by a car? This is the heart of the drunk driver theory. One scenario avoids complex conspiracies, predators, and international trafficking rings, leaning instead on something tragically human: a frightened child, a poorly lit street, and a driver who made the worst possible decision in a moment of panic. Madeleine McCann was 3 years old when she vanished, old enough to comprehend the absence of her parents, and old enough to attempt to find them. Her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were dining with friends at the Ocean Club's tapas restaurant, a walk of about a minute or 55 meters from their apartment. They had left the sliding patio door unlocked, intending to check on the children every 20 to 30 minutes, a routine they had followed throughout their holiday. But what if, during one of those intervals, Madeleine awoke? Perhaps she realized she was alone, or perhaps she remembered the previous night when, according to her mother, she and her brother Sean had cried and no one came. It is not difficult to imagine a small child deciding to get out of bed, walk through the door, and look for her parents. If that occurred, Madeleine would have exited into the narrow pedestrian walkway behind apartment 5A before turning toward the street. The surrounding roads were dimly lit, and at that time of night, just past 9:30 p.m. Few people were outside. There were no security cameras, no automatic street surveillance, and no patrols. Praia da Luz in 2007 was not equipped with the kind of infrastructure that might have captured such a moment. The theory then imagines a local driver, perhaps a resort worker, or a tourist under the influence, driving too quickly and not anticipating a child on the road. A flash of pink in the headlights, no time to react, an impact. What happens next is what would turn an accident into a cover-up. Instead of calling the police, the driver panics. Perhaps they have been drinking, lack a license, or are already on probation. Whatever the reason, the instinct is to flee. They place the child in the vehicle and drive off into the darkness. In this version of events, Madeleine was not targeted. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then vanished not by abduction, but by avoidance. The most compelling element of this theory is the silence it leaves behind. There were no screams that night, no reports of a struggle, no broken glass, and no signs of forced entry. Madeleine's bed looked almost undisturbed. Her favorite stuffed toy was still there, and her siblings slept through the entire incident. If she had simply walked out, no one would have known until it was too late. Supporters of this theory point to the eerie lack of physical evidence as a form of negative proof. No blood, no signs of violence, no definitive DNA traces, and no forced doors would be consistent with a body being removed quickly and quietly before any search began. The first substantial police response did not occur until nearly an hour after Madeleine was reported missing, providing any potential perpetrator ample time to disappear. Critics, of course, raise valid points. There were no reports of a vehicle accident that night. No witnesses claimed to hear a crash, and no unusual damage was noted on any vehicles in the area. If such an accident occurred, it left no trace. However, the streets were quiet, and if the incident happened on a side road with no one around, it may have gone unheard. Another question is whether a 3-year-old could navigate the apartment and walk outside without waking the twins or attracting attention. While not impossible, the biggest challenge to this theory is the absence of a confession. If this were a simple accident, why has no one come forward in 18 years? The answer might lie in cultural factors and timing. In some small communities, there can be a reluctance to report crimes, especially those involving alcohol or accidental harm. A local driver may have feared the legal and social consequences. Moreover, once the investigation's focus shifted towards abduction and foreign predators, local theories like this were deprioritized. Portuguese police did not conduct mass vehicle inspections or canvass for drunk drivers. Former Portuguese investigator Gonçalo Amaral, who led the early stages of the case, briefly floated the idea of accidental death, but never publicly pursued the hit-and-run angle. The drunk driver theory remains speculative. There is no vehicle, no suspect, and no proof. But it offers a sobering alternative, replacing monsters with the idea that a small mistake followed by a selfish decision could erase a child from the world. It is a theory built more on absence than presence. Some crimes are impulsive, others calculated. Some are the result of panic, others of precision. But few theories in the case of Madeleine McCann carry the weight of cold, premeditated malice in the way the predator theory does. At the center of this possibility stands one name: Christian Bruckner. In June 2020, German authorities publicly named Bruckner as the prime suspect. He was not just a figure of interest. He was a convicted rapist and repeat offender with a documented history of child sexual abuse, who, crucially, was living just minutes away from the McCann's holiday apartment when Madeleine vanished. Bruckner's criminal record spans decades and borders. His crimes ranged from theft to drug trafficking, but his most disturbing offenses were of a sexual nature. In 2005, just 2 years before Madeleine's disappearance, he brutally raped a 72-year-old American woman in her home in Praia da Luz, the same resort town. For years, the case remained unsolved until advances in DNA technology led to his conviction. By the spring of 2007, Bruckner was living in a dilapidated camper van in the Algarve region with no fixed address, making money through odd jobs and petty crime. He was also known for his obsession with young girls. The most damning detail came from digital forensics. On the evening of 3rd May 2007, the night Madeleine went missing, Bruckner received a call on a prepaid mobile phone at 7:32 p.m. The mobile phone tower that received the call was located just a few hundred meters from the Ocean Club resort. He was in the area, he had no alibi, and he turned his phone off immediately after the call ended. Years later, a search of a former property Bruckner rented in Germany yielded a gruesome discovery. Buried beneath the body of his dog, police found a plastic bag containing over 8,000 images and videos of child sexual abuse. Still, despite these deeply disturbing findings, no charges related to Madeleine's case have been filed against Bruckner. German authorities have been vocal about their belief in his guilt. Prosecutor Hans Christian Walters has repeatedly stated they have concrete evidence linking him to Madeleine's disappearance, but clarified this does not mean proof, a distinction that stunned the public. The nature of this evidence remains undisclosed. Bruckner remains imprisoned in Germany for unrelated crimes and could be eligible for release as early as 2026. For supporters of this theory, the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. He fits the profile, he was in the area, and he had the means, motive, and history. Yet for all this alignment, the predator theory has one fatal flaw. There is no direct evidence tying Bruckner to Madeleine. No DNA, no fingerprints, no eyewitness placing him at the Ocean Club that night. He has never confessed and has publicly denied involvement. Despite extensive searches of his former properties, no material evidence of Madeleine has ever been recovered. Still, the idea of a lone predator remains disturbingly plausible. The lack of surveillance in Praia da Luz in 2007 meant an experienced criminal could have taken Madeleine from the easily accessible bedroom window without a sound and disappeared. The fact that no one saw or heard anything may not be a gap in the theory, but its cruelest proof. Until some fragment of undeniable truth emerges, Bruckner remains legally just a suspect. What if Madeleine McCann was not killed? What if she was not the victim of a panicked thief or a lone predator, but instead taken with purpose by a network that knew exactly what they were doing. Among the many theories surrounding her disappearance, the human trafficking theory is one of the most unsettling. This is not because it is gruesome, but because it is quiet, calculated, and demonstrates a chilling efficiency. It proposes that Madeleine was not a target of opportunity, but a commodity, a child selected, taken, and transported by individuals who had done it before and knew how to leave nothing behind. Praia da Luz, the coastal Portuguese town where the McCanns were on holiday, was a perfect gateway. Nestled on the southwestern tip of Europe, it offered easy access to Spain, France, and North Africa. A child could be across the Spanish border within 90 minutes, on a ferry to Morocco in under 4 hours, or traveling along the highways of Western Europe before daylight. In 2007, advanced border alerts and integrated child trafficking watch lists across countries were not in place. For traffickers, the Algarve was not just a resort. It was a logistical launchpad. Madeleine, heartbreakingly, fit what traffickers might consider a high-value profile. She was young, white, with blonde hair and large blue eyes, features considered marketable in the most disturbing corners of illegal adoption rings and exploitation networks. What adds weight to this theory is the manner in which the abduction appeared to unfold. There was no broken window, no sign of forced entry, and no loud noises. Her siblings remained undisturbed, and her stuffed toy was left untouched. The apartment showed no signs of a struggle. If someone took her, they did so silently, precisely, and without leaving a trace. That kind of execution suggests planning, indicating someone who knew the family's schedule, had observed their routine, and waited for the opportune moment. In the days leading up to Madeleine's disappearance, multiple reports from other guests described unfamiliar men loitering near the Ocean Club resort, some allegedly taking photographs of children by the pool. These individuals were never properly identified or investigated at the time, as Portuguese police focused early on the theory that the McCanns themselves were responsible,